Sarah Mitchell never imagined that her routine humanitarian mission to deliver medical supplies would turn into a deadly game of survival. The 28-year-old nurse from Colorado had volunteered with the International Relief Organization for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for what awaited in the remote mountain region of Kazakhstan. The convoy had been traveling for 2 days through winding mountain roads when the first explosion shattered the morning silence. Sarah felt the ground shake beneath their medical truck as debris rained down from the cliff tops above. Through the dusty windshield, she watched in horror as the lead vehicle disappeared in a ball of orange flame. "Get down," shouted Marcus, their security coordinator, as automatic gunfire erupted from multiple positions. The remaining vehicles scattered, trying to find cover behind large boulders scattered along the narrow mountain pass. Sarah's driver, a local man named Ahmed, gunned the engine toward a rocky outcrop, but a second explosion sent their truck rolling down a steep embankment. When Sarah regained consciousness, she found herself alone and injured. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her left shoulder throbbed with each breath. Ahmed lay motionless in the driver's seat, and she could hear voices approaching from above, speaking in a harsh dialect she didn't recognize. She forced herself to move, crawling through the shattered rear window of the truck into the dense undergrowth. Her medical training kicked in as she quickly assessed her injuries while staying hidden. The voices grew closer, and she could hear boots crunching on gravel as armed men searched the wreckage. From her hiding spot behind a fallen tree, Sarah watched as 6 men in military fatigues examined the destroyed convoy. They weren't regular soldiers. Their equipment was mismatched, and they moved with the casual brutality of mercenaries or insurgents. One of them barked orders while pointing in different directions, clearly organizing a search. Sarah knew she had to move. The dense forest offered some protection, but these mountains were their territory. She had no radio, no weapons, and no idea where the nearest friendly forces might be. Her only advantages were her medical knowledge and the element of surprise. As darkness fell, she began moving deeper into the forest. Every sound made her freeze: the snap of a twig, the call of a bird, the distant echo of voices. She found a small stream and followed it downstream, hoping it would lead away from the ambush site. Hours later, exhausted and shivering, she discovered an abandoned shepherd's hut hidden among the trees. The wooden structure was old but solid, with a small fireplace and basic supplies left by previous occupants. Sarah allowed herself a few hours of rest, treating her wounds with supplies from her personal medical kit. When dawn broke, she heard them again. Voices carried on the morning wind, closer than before. Through a crack in the wooden wall, she saw movement among the trees. They were systematic in their search, moving in a grid pattern through the forest. Sarah realized that running would only delay the inevitable. They knew this terrain better than she did, and they had time on their side. She needed to change the rules of the game. She spent the day observing their patterns from various hiding spots. There were 8 men total, working in pairs to cover more ground. They communicated with hand signals and brief radio calls, suggesting military training despite their irregular appearance. Most importantly, they seemed confident, too confident for their own good. As night approached, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't outrun them, but she might be able to outthink them. Using skills learned during her college years on the wilderness survival team, she began preparing for what would either be her escape or her last stand. The first target presented himself just after midnight. A lone sentry had been posted near the stream while his partner slept 50 meters away. Sarah approached silently through the thick underbrush, moving inch by inch over the course of 2 hours. The man was alert, but focused on the obvious approaches, the stream bed, and the main trail. He never looked up into the trees where Sarah had positioned herself on a sturdy branch directly overhead. She waited until his attention was fixed on a sound downstream before dropping silently behind him. Her medical training proved unexpectedly useful. She knew exactly where to apply pressure to the carotid artery to cause unconsciousness without permanent damage. The sentry dropped without making a sound, and Sarah quickly secured his radio and weapon. She dragged his unconscious form deeper into the forest and used medical tape from her kit to secure him to a tree. When he woke hours later, he would find a note in broken local script. Your friends will join you soon. Leave this place or face the consequences. Sarah moved to higher ground to observe the reaction. When a missing sentry was discovered at dawn, the remaining 7 men showed their first signs of uncertainty. Their leader, a scarred man with dead eyes, shouted orders that echoed through the forest. The casual confidence was gone, replaced by angry frustration. They found their companion hours later, alive but humiliated. Sarah watched through binoculars taken from the sentry as they cut him free. The psychological effect was immediate. They began looking over their shoulders, moving closer together, speaking in hushed tones. That night, she struck again. 2 men had been assigned to guard their makeshift camp while the others slept. Sarah had spent hours studying their positions, noting how one guard walked a predictable patrol route while the other remained stationary. She waited until the walking guard was at the farthest point of his route before making her move. A handful of pebbles thrown into the bushes on the opposite side of camp drew the stationary guard's attention. As he moved to investigate, Sarah slipped into their camp and contaminated their water supply with a mild sedative from her medical kit, enough to cause drowsiness and disorientation but not serious harm. The effects became apparent the following day. The remaining men moved sluggishly, made obvious mistakes, and began snapping at each other. Their leader suspected sabotage, but couldn't identify the source. Trust within the group began to fracture. On the 3rd day, Sarah made her boldest move yet. She had identified the group's communications equipment, a portable radio setup they used to coordinate with their handlers. While they slept off the effects of the drugged water, she infiltrated their camp once more. Instead of destroying the radio, she reprogrammed it to broadcast on emergency frequencies used by international relief organizations. Her message was brief but clear. American humanitarian worker under attack in Sector 7. Multiple hostile contacts. Require immediate extraction. She also left another note, this one more detailed. You have lost 3 opportunities to leave peacefully. Your water has been poisoned. Your communications are compromised. Your leader's name is Viktor Kozlov, wanted for war crimes in 4 countries. Leave now, or tomorrow you will face a reckoning. The last part was a bluff based on overheard conversations, but the psychological impact was devastating. When the men woke to find their camp had been infiltrated again while they slept, panic set in completely. Sarah watched from her elevated position as arguments broke out. 2 of the younger men wanted to abandon the search immediately. Victor tried to maintain control, but his authority was crumbling with each mysterious incident. The breakthrough came when she overheard their radio communications. Victor was reporting to someone called Control, explaining that they were hunting the woman who had somehow evaded capture for 4 days. But Control's response was not what Victor expected. Abort mission immediately, came the crackling voice. International pressure is mounting. Extract to Rally Point Charlie within 12 hours. Victor's face went dark with rage, but he had no choice. As Sarah continued watching, she realized that her simple message on the emergency frequency had triggered a diplomatic response. Someone, somewhere, was putting pressure on whoever employed these men. But Victor wasn't finished. Even as his men began packing their gear, he pulled aside his 2 most loyal followers. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language told the story. They were planning one final sweep to find her before leaving. As the main group prepared to depart, Victor and his 2 companions began moving in her direction with grim determination. They had abandoned stealth for speed, crashing through the underbrush like hunters closing in on cornered prey. Sarah knew that her game of cat and mouse was about to become a direct confrontation. She checked her appropriated weapon, a rifle with 2 magazines of ammunition. Not much against 3 experienced fighters, but it would have to do. The final phase of her ordeal was about to begin, and this time, there might be no room for the subtle tactics that had served her so well. Victor was done playing games, and Sarah knew that only one of them would walk out of these mountains alive. Viktor Kozlov moved through the forest like a predator who had finally caught the scent of his prey. Behind him, his two remaining men, Dmitri and Alexei, followed with the mechanical precision of soldiers who had done this kind of hunting before. Sarah could hear them approaching long before she saw them, their heavy boots crushing undergrowth as they abandoned any pretense of stealth. From her position on a rocky ledge 30 feet above the forest floor, Sarah studied the three men through her stolen binoculars. Victor was exactly what she had expected from his voice, mid-40s, weathered face marked by old shrapnel scars, and the cold eyes of someone who had killed many times before. His two companions were younger, but equally dangerous, moving with the fluid coordination of a practice team. Sarah had perhaps 20 minutes before they reached her position. The ledge offered excellent visibility, but limited escape routes. Exactly the kind of tactical trap she had been trying to avoid. But circumstances had forced her hand, and now she would have to make the terrain work for her instead of against her. She began moving immediately, not to escape, but to prepare. The rocky outcrop was riddled with crevices and small caves formed by centuries of erosion. Sarah had discovered these hiding spots during her initial reconnaissance, and now they would become her battlefield. The first part of her plan required precision timing. She positioned herself at a narrow choke point where the main trail curved around a massive boulder. From this position, she could see the approaching men while remaining hidden behind a rock face. Victor appeared first, rifle raised and ready. He moved carefully now, scanning the terrain with the expertise of someone who had survived countless ambushes. But his focus was on obvious threats, hidden snipers, tripwires, explosive devices. He wasn't expecting a lone woman with medical training to turn his own tactics against him. Sarah waited until all three men had passed her position before making her first move. She had spent hours practicing with the stolen rifle, learning its weight and balance. Her father had taken her hunting as a child, but she had never imagined using those skills against human targets. Her first shot was deliberately wide, a warning shot that sent all three men diving for cover. The psychological effect was immediate. Instead of hunting a fleeing victim, they now faced an armed opponent who had chosen the time and place for confrontation. "You want to play games?" Victor shouted in accented English. "Fine, we play." But his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Sarah had spent 4 days turning hunters into the hunted, and that psychological reversal was working in her favor. She moved immediately after firing, using a series of small caves and crevices to change position without being seen. Victor and his men responded professionally, establishing a perimeter and beginning a systematic search of the rocky outcrop. The second shot came from a completely different angle, again deliberately wide, but closer this time. Dmitri spun around, tried to locate the source, while Alexei provided covering fire at shadows. Their coordination was good, but they were fighting an invisible enemy on unfamiliar ground. Sarah's medical knowledge became an unexpected advantage in this deadly game. She understood how stress and adrenaline affected human performance, increased heart rate, tunnel vision, impaired hearing. Every shot she fired, every change of position, added to their psychological pressure. The third shot found its mark. Not a killing shot. Sarah aimed for Alexei's shoulder, sending him crashing into a pile of loose rocks with a scream of pain and surprise. The wound was serious, but not fatal, exactly as she had intended. Victor's response was immediate and brutal. He sprayed automatic fire across the entire rock face, sending chips of stone flying in all directions. Sarah pressed herself deep into a narrow crevice as bullets whined overhead. "Dmitri," Victor's voice carried clearly across the rocks. "Circle left. Drive her toward the cliff." Sarah realized that her tactical advantage was temporary. Victor might be frustrated, but he was still a professional soldier with years of combat experience. He was adapting to the situation, using his wounded man as bait while positioning Dmitri for a flanking maneuver. She needed to change the rules again. Moving through the network of caves and crevices, Sarah worked her way toward Alexei's position. The wounded man was trying to bandage his shoulder while keeping watch for her next attack. His rifle lay just out of reach, knocked away when he fell. Sarah approached from below, using a route that required crawling through a space barely wide enough for her shoulders. When she emerged behind Alexei's position, she found him struggling to reload his sidearm with one good arm. "Don't move," she whispered, pressing her rifle barrel against the base of his skull. "I'm not going to kill you, but I need your help." Alexei froze, his breathing ragged with pain and fear. Sarah quickly relieved him of his weapons and communication equipment, then began examining his wound with professional efficiency. "The bullet went clean through," she told him in a calm, clinical voice. "You'll live if you get proper medical attention soon. But first, you're going to help me end this." Using strips torn from her own clothing, she created an improvised pressure bandage for his wound. Alexei watched in confusion as his captor provided medical treatment while maintaining her weapon. "Why?" he gasped. "Because I'm not like your boss," Sarah replied. "I don't kill people unless I have to." She activated his radio and handed it to him. "Call Victor. Tell him you're wounded but alive. Tell him the woman wants to negotiate." Alexei hesitated, then keyed the radio. His voice was weak but clear. "Victor, I am hit. The woman, she wants to talk." Victor's response crackled through the radio. "Where is she?" Sarah took the radio herself. "I'm here, Victor. Your man needs medical attention. I can provide it, or I can let him bleed out. Your choice." There was a long pause before Victor responded. "What do you want?" "Safe passage out of these mountains. In return, I'll leave your men alive and provide medical care for the wounded. You are hardly in a position to negotiate." Sarah smiled grimly. "I have you, man. I have high ground. I have unlimited ammunition from your own weapons. And in about 6 hours, international rescue teams will start looking for me in this exact area. How do you think that will go for you?" Another pause. "Then, you cannot escape. Even if you kill us all, there are others. Maybe, but you won't be around to see it." Sarah could hear Victor talking to Dmitri in hushed tones. She used the time to improve Alexei's bandage and check his vital signs. The wound was serious, but manageable with proper care. "I have a counter-proposal." Victor's voice came through the radio. "Single combat. Just you and me. Winner takes all." Sarah almost laughed. "You think I'm stupid enough to give up my tactical advantage for some kind of honor duel?" "I think you're not a killer," Victor replied. "You have had multiple opportunities to kill my men, but you have not. You bandaged the man you shot. This tells me something about who you are." He was right, and Sarah knew it. She had been trying to survive without becoming a murderer, walking a narrow line between self-defense and cold-blooded killing. But Victor's proposal was still suicide. "Think about it this way," Victor continued. "If I win, my remaining man and I will leave quietly. No more hunting. If you win, you have proven that you can defeat us all." It was a trap, obviously. But Sarah realized that Victor was also trapped by his own reputation and the expectations of his employers. He couldn't return empty-handed after being outmaneuvered by a single woman for 5 days. "What kind of combat?" she asked. "Hand-to-hand. No weapons. Ancient rules." Sarah looked at Alexei, who was watching the conversation with growing alarm. "He's lying," the wounded man whispered. "Victor never fights fair." That confirmed what Sarah already suspected, but it also gave her an idea. Victor expected her to decline, then try to maintain her siege position until help arrived. But Sarah had been studying these men for days, and she knew Victor's weakness, his pride. "I accept," she said into the radio, "but not your terms. We each get one weapon of our choice. And your wounded man stays with me as insurance." Victor's laughter echoed across the rocks. "You want to fight a war veteran with medical training? I want to end this before anyone else gets hurt." The silence stretched for several minutes. Sarah could imagine Victor weighing his options. He was bigger, stronger, and far more experienced in combat. But she had proven resourceful and unpredictable, qualities that might compensate for physical disadvantages. Very well. Victor's voice finally came through the radio. 1 hour. The clearing below the rocks. 1 weapon each. Sarah spent the next hour preparing for what might be her final confrontation. She treated Alexei's wound more thoroughly, ensuring he would survive even if she didn't. She also questioned him about Victor's fighting style and preferences. He is very strong, Alexei warned her, but he has old injuries. His left knee was damaged by shrapnel 2 years ago, and he favors his right side because of broken ribs that never healed properly. Sarah filed this information away, along with her own assessment of Victor's psychological profile. He was arrogant, brutal, but also methodical. He would expect her to choose a ranged weapon, a pistol or rifle, to compensate for her physical disadvantages. Instead, she chose something that would surprise him completely. When the hour was up, Sarah helped Alexei to a position where he could observe the clearing but remain safely out of the line of fire. She then made her way down to the designated meeting spot, carrying her chosen weapon. Victor was already waiting, standing in the center of the clearing with his arms crossed. He had chosen a military knife, a wicked-looking blade designed for close combat. His confidence was obvious in his relaxed posture and casual smile. "So," he called out as Sarah emerged from the tree line. "The little nurse comes to play soldier." Sarah didn't respond to the taunt. Instead, she raised her chosen weapon, a medical scalpel from her emergency kit, its blade glinting in the afternoon sunlight. Victor's smile faltered slightly. He had expected her to choose a gun or perhaps a hunting knife. The scalpel was an unusual choice, but also a revealing one. It spoke to Sarah's medical background and her understanding of human anatomy. "Interesting choice," Victor said, beginning to circle her slowly. "But a tiny blade against a soldier's knife? This will be over quickly." Sarah matched his movement, keeping the distance between them constant. "We'll see." What Victor didn't know was that Sarah had spent the previous hour doing more than just treating Alexei's wound. She had been preparing her scalpel with a coating of sedative from her medical kit. Not enough to be fatal, but sufficient to cause disorientation and muscle weakness if it entered the bloodstream. The real battle was about to begin, and Sarah knew that everything she had learned about survival, medicine, and human psychology would be tested in the next few minutes. Victor might be a trained killer, but she had advantages he couldn't anticipate. The circle they were walking grew smaller with each step, like a deadly spiral, drawing them toward an inevitable collision. Victor struck first, lunging forward with his military knife in a classic combat thrust aimed at Sarah's midsection. She had expected the aggressive opening. His psychology profile suggested he would try to end the fight quickly rather than engage in a prolonged battle. Sarah sidestepped the attack and slashed with her scalpel, opening a thin line across Victor's forearm. The cut was shallow but precise, designed to deliver her improvised sedative into his bloodstream while avoiding major arteries. Victor spun around, surprised by her speed and accuracy. A thin trickle of blood ran down his arm, and he looked at the wound with more interest than concern. "First blood to the nurse," he said with grudging respect. "But that little scratch won't save you." Sarah didn't waste energy on responses. She was already moving, using footwork learned during college self-defense classes to stay mobile and unpredictable. Victor followed, more cautious now, studying her movement patterns. The sedative would need several minutes to take effect, and Sarah knew she couldn't afford to trade blows with a man twice her size. Her strategy was to stay alive long enough for the drug to begin working, then exploit his increasing impairment. Victor's second attack came as a series of quick slashes designed to overwhelm her defenses. Sarah gave ground steadily, using her smaller size to duck and weave between the knife strikes. She managed to land 2 more cuts, one across his shoulder, another on his left thigh. You fight like a coward, Victor snarled, breathing harder now. Stand still and face me properly. But Sarah could see the first signs that her plan was working. Victor's movements were becoming slightly less coordinated, and his breathing was more labored than the physical exertion warranted. The sedative was designed for injection, not topical absorption, but the multiple cuts were allowing it to enter his system. Victor seemed to realize something was wrong. He paused his assault and examined his wounds more carefully, noticing how they burned with an unusual intensity. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Medical school," Sarah replied simply. Victor's face darkened with understanding and rage. He abandoned any pretense of tactical fighting and came at her with the desperate fury of a trapped animal. Sarah barely managed to avoid a vicious slash that would have opened her throat, feeling the wind from the blade as it passed inches from her neck. But Victor's charge carried him past her, and she managed to open another cut along his back as he stumbled forward. This one was deeper, ensuring maximum absorption of the remaining sedative on her blade. Victor turned around more slowly this time, his coordination visibly impaired. Sarah could see the confusion in his eyes as his own body began to betray him. "Poison," he said thickly. "Sedative," Sarah corrected. "You'll live, but you're going to get very sleepy very quickly." Victor tried another attack, but his legs were becoming unsteady. Sarah easily avoided the clumsy thrust and responded with a precise cut to his wrist that forced him to drop the knife. As Victor sank to his knees, struggling to stay conscious, Sarah heard movement in the forest around them. Dmitri was approaching, his rifle raised and trained on her. "Step away from him," Dmitri called out in heavily accented English. Sarah raised her hands, still holding the scalpel. "Your boss is alive. The sedative isn't fatal. But if you shoot me, you'll never get the antidote." It was a bluff. There was no antidote needed for a simple sedative that would wear off naturally in a few hours. But Dmitri didn't know that. "You lie," Dmitri said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Do you want to risk it?" Sarah asked. "Victor is your meal ticket. Without him, what happens to your payment for this job?" Dmitri hesitated, and Sarah pressed her advantage. "I can wake him up right now with a stimulant injection, or I can let him sleep for the next 6 hours while international rescue teams flood these mountains. Your choice." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Sarah could see Dmitri wrestling with the decision, his rifle wavering slightly as he considered his options. The deadlock was broken by the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Sarah felt a surge of relief. Her emergency broadcast had finally brought help. Dmitri heard the aircraft too, and his face went pale. "Antidote," he said urgently. "Give him the antidote now." Sarah moved toward her medical kit, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "I need to prepare the injection," she said. "It takes a few minutes." In reality, she was buying time while the helicopter sounds grew louder. Sarah pulled out a syringe and began drawing fluid from a vial of harmless saline solution, making the process look more complicated than it actually was. Victor was still conscious, but barely responsive, his head lolling as he struggled to focus. Sarah knelt beside him and made a show of checking his pulse and pupil response. "The sedative is affecting his heart rate," she lied smoothly. "If I don't counteract it soon, he could go into cardiac arrest." Dmitri lowered his rifle slightly, torn between keeping her covered and helping his unconscious leader. "How long?" 2 minutes, Sarah replied, continuing to prepare the fake antidote. "Maybe 3. The helicopter sounds were much closer now, and Sarah could see Dmitri becoming increasingly agitated. He kept glancing toward the sky, then back at Victor's motionless form. "Faster," he demanded. Sarah pretended to fumble with the syringe, dropping it, and having to start over with a fresh one. Every second of delay brought rescue closer and increased Dmitri's desperation. When the first helicopter appeared over the tree line, Dmitri made his decision. He threw down his rifle and raised his hands in surrender, shouting in his native language. Sarah quickly administered the saline injection to Victor, maintaining the pretense that it was a real antidote. Victor's condition wouldn't change for several hours, but Dmitri would assume the medicine needed time to work. The rescue helicopter circled the clearing once before beginning its descent. Sarah could see armed personnel preparing to fast rope down while other aircraft moved to secure the surrounding area. As the helicopter touched down, Sarah helped Dmitri carry Victor toward the aircraft. The unconscious man was breathing normally, and his pulse was strong. He would recover completely from the sedative once it wore off. The rescue team leader, a stern woman in military fatigues, approached with her weapon ready. "You're Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "These two men need medical attention. The unconscious one has been sedated, and there's another wounded man on the rocks above us." "Are there other hostiles in the area?" "Not anymore," Sarah said, thinking of the 5 men who had fled earlier after their mission was aborted. "But there might be others in the region." As a medical team took charge of Victor and Dmitri, Sarah guided a search party to Alexei's position. The wounded man was conscious and cooperative, grateful to see proper medical attention arriving. During the helicopter ride to the nearest military base, Sarah finally allowed herself to process what had happened. For 5 days, she had been hunted through hostile territory by trained killers. She had survived by using her medical knowledge as a weapon, her compassion as a strategy, and her intelligence to overcome superior force. But the experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had been forced to hurt people, to manipulate and deceive, to make life and death decisions with incomplete information. The quiet nurse who had volunteered for a humanitarian mission no longer existed. At the base hospital, Sarah underwent her own medical evaluation while providing detailed debriefings to intelligence officers. Victor and his men were being held for questioning, their future uncertain. Diplomatic pressure was mounting on whoever had hired them, and there were hints that a larger investigation was underway. 3 days later, Sarah learned that Viktor Kozlov was indeed a wanted war criminal, responsible for atrocities in multiple conflicts over the past decade. His capture had been a significant intelligence coup, providing leads to several other criminal networks. Dmitri and Alexei were smaller fish, hired muscle with limited knowledge of their employer's larger operations. They would face charges for their role in the convoy ambush, but they might also become valuable witnesses against the people who had hired them. The other 5 men from Victor's team had been captured trying to cross the border 2 days after the rescue. Without their leader's experience and discipline, they had made basic mistakes that led to their arrest by Border Patrol forces. Sarah's ordeal had accomplished more than just her own survival. Her actions had dismantled an entire criminal cell and provided intelligence that would help prevent future attacks on humanitarian missions. But the personal cost was harder to measure. Sarah found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, scanning rooms for exit routes, analyzing strangers for potential threats. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive in the mountains was difficult to turn off in the safety of civilization. The International Relief Organization offered her extended leave, counseling support, and eventually a desk job far from any conflict zones. But Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by requesting assignment to a security training program. "If I'm going back into the field," she told the director, "I want to be prepared for situations like this. Not just as a victim, but as someone who can protect others." 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell returned to humanitarian work with a new role and new responsibilities. She was still a nurse, still committed to helping people in crisis situations. But she was also something else, a guardian angel with medical training and hard-won wisdom about survival in hostile territory. Her first assignment took her to a refugee camp in East Africa, where she helped establish security protocols for medical personnel. Her reputation had preceded her. The nurse who had single-handedly neutralized a team of war criminals was both inspiration and legend among relief workers worldwide. But Sarah carried her experiences quietly, sharing the tactical lessons while keeping the psychological scars private. She knew that survival sometimes required becoming something you never expected to be, and that the line between protector and predator could be surprisingly thin. In quiet moments, she still thought about those 5 days in the mountains, about the choices she had made, the lives she had spared, and the dangerous knowledge she had gained about her own capabilities. The experience had taught her that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. More importantly, it had taught her that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about remaining human while doing whatever was necessary to protect yourself and others. Sarah had found that balance, walking the narrow path between victim and victor, between healer and warrior. The mountains of Karakistan were far behind her now, but the lessons learned in those hostile peaks would guide her decisions for the rest of her life. She had discovered reserves of strength and cunning she never knew she possessed, and she carried that knowledge like a secret weapon, hoping never to need it again, but ready if circumstances demanded. Sarah Mitchell had entered those mountains as a humanitarian volunteer and emerged as something much more complex. A protector forged by necessity, tempered by compassion, and strengthened by the knowledge that sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be prepared for war.